what are these rules when it comes to screenwriting? You hear about the rules, break the rules, don't break the rules, but what are the rules? We're going to talk about that today. We're going to pull back the curtain or rip off the Band-Aid or whatever the case may be. Thank you so much for watching. Thank you for liking if you're finding value. Thank you for subscribing if you haven't done that. I really do appreciate it. There's also a bunch of links below. Be sure to check those out. Let's not waste any more time. Let's jump in. There are four broad categories of being a screenwriter or working as a screenwriter, and we're going to talk about all four of those and the rules associated or not associated with each of those four categories. So here we go. First, let's talk about behavior. This is just your way you handle yourself outside of writing. So how you're dealing with other people, how you're interacting with other people. And ultimately, this is just screenwriter etiquette, right? Like using my screenwriter manners as I deal with other people. And there are some do's and don'ts here. I'm not going to dive into them. I've made a video about screenwriter etiquette. I'll link it up here so you can check that out. So there's a couple of things to do and don't, but ultimately the guideline here to kind of think about is treat others kindly. That means treating them with respect. That means being courteous. That means thinking of others more than you think of yourself. So it's just using your manners. So is there a few rules and stuff as it relates to behavior? Well, a couple, but as long as you're treating other people kindly and respectfully, you're going to be fine on this one. Second, let's talk about writing. Okay, this is when we talk about writing, I'm talking about specifically sitting down and doing it, like typing the words on the page or handwriting the words on a piece of paper, however you choose to write. Now, in this one, there's not really any rules either. Okay, you can kind of do it as you want to do it, but there are some best practices. So things like having a regular time to write, having a regular place to write, spending time, dedicated time every day or most of the days working on your craft. Now, that doesn't mean you have to be putting words on the page. Sometimes it might mean watching videos like this where you're trying to learn. Sometimes it means reading a book. Sometimes it means watching interviews. Sometimes it means watching TV shows or movies. They're things that are in the similar vein to what you're wanting to write. Now, you can't be spending all your time doing those things and none of your time writing. You still have to spend some time writing, but having a regular time every day to do that helps your brain show up, helps you show up. You're ready to write, you're ready to go. So those are some best practices, but there's not really any rules when it comes to writing. Most of the rules that you'll hear people talk about come into play when they start talking about the screenplay itself. And that really breaks down into two things. So I told you we're talking about four. So we've talked about behavior, we've talked about writing, and then there's two more, and that's story and storytelling. And a lot of people mix those up and think that they're the same thing. They are not. They are very different things. So we're going to talk about story elements and rules associated with that, and then storytelling elements and rules associated with that. Story first. So there are things that make a story a story. Now, just step back for a second and think about cars, okay? Just think about a car, whatever car you want to imagine in your head. Now, all of us who are watching this video may be thinking about different cars, okay? But they're all cars. There are things that make a car, just like there are things that make a story a story. So if you're trying to build a car, okay, and you don't put the tires on, you don't have a car. It's not going to run. I mean, it may kind of look like a car, but it's not going to do anything. It's not serving the function that it's supposed to serve as its thing. And the story is the same way. If you're like, you know what? I don't really need a third act. You kind of just left off the tires, right? So when you step back and think about it, are there rules when it comes to story? Well, yes and no. It's similar to how there are rules when you make a car, okay? There are certain things you have to include, and there's a lot of room for creativity and a lot of room for spontaneity. You can do lots of things with a car and it still be a car, just like you can do lots of things with a story and it can still be a story, but it still has to be a story. It's still about someone who wants something badly, they're having trouble getting it, they get it or they don't. That is a story. You still have to have those elements. So if you're like, I'm going to tell a story, but I'm not going to, follow the rules of story. Well, now your car looks like a bicycle and people are wanting to buy a car and you're showing them a bike. So they're not going to be interested. I'm sorry, but that's just how it works. So you kind of have to still follow the rules. The thing still has to look like the thing. Okay, that's part of the rules of story. So when people talk about the rules of story, that's what they're talking about. It's got to still look like a story. It's got to feel like a story. There's got to be ups and downs. There's got to be all the stuff that gets from A to B to C to D. Like, all that stuff's got to be there. And if you're taking that stuff out, you don't have a story. And you might be thinking, oh, but I can break the rules. I'm trying to like get noticed or whatever. And it's like, well, but people aren't going to like your story because it's not a story. They're wanting a story, not a bike. So make them a story. Now, if you're confused on story, I just want to let you know, in the resources below, there is a free guide, 100% free guide it's called The Complete Guide of Story Structure. It's the whole thing, all of it. So you can read that. You can really understand what story is, what story structure is, how it works. I'm not talking about storytelling, I'm talking about story. So that's a free guide below. Be sure to click on that. The last of the 4 categories, so we've had behavior, writing, story. The last one is storytelling. So storytelling involves the way you tell the story. So you've created the story, okay? It looks like a story, but now we also have to tell it. And part of screenwriting is not just figuring out the story, it's also figuring out how to tell it in an effective way. So these are 2 kind of different skills. Once I understand story and how to build that, that's great. But now I got to figure out how to tell the story in this medium. And that's where it gets to be a little challenging. And honestly, that's where more of the rules abide. Okay, so we have things like format. And you can play with format a little bit, but screenplays are formatted a certain way for a very specific reason. And you have to play within those rules. So you need slug lines, you need description, you need characters and character introductions, and you need dialogue in the center of the page. You need those things, and they're at different margins because each page is about a minute. It takes you about a minute. If you start reading a 120-page screenplay, it will take you about 120 minutes to read it, give or take, depending on how fast you read. If you were to shoot it, it would be about 120 minutes. That's why it's formatted that way. And it's also formatted specific ways to help different departments when they start working on the film to be able to do different things. So you need to show that you can play within the rules of the system, the formatting rules. It should look like a screenplay, right? It's got to look like a story, but it's also got to look like a screenplay. So now you got to take your story you've made and you got to put it into this form, and you have to follow those rules. So things like formatting are important. Things like grammar are important. The way you submit that script as a PDF is important. Okay, so you need all those things. Those are rules you kind of need to play by. There's also this notion of writing a spec script versus a shooting script. So if you're writing a script that has not been sold, okay, so you're not rewriting it, you're not revising it for production, you're writing a spec script. And when you're writing a spec script, there are some things that you should not be doing. You should not really be including any direction of the camera, angle on, zoom in, none of that. You generally should avoid transitions. You don't do that. You don't capitalize a lot of stuff. You capitalize characters the first times we meet them, but other than that, you don't really capitalize a lot of stuff because you're writing a script to be read. You're wanting to show you can play within the format, within the storytelling rules, but you also aren't wanting to step on other people's toes. You want to keep people reading. That's the main job of a spec script. Just keep people reading. As long as they're reading, you're doing your job because they're reading to read your story. So which means you're telling your story in a good and effective way. So the rules are here to really help you communicate to other people the story you're wanting to tell. And it should be a story, have a beginning, a middle, and end, should get all the way to the end, have it all there, and now we're going to tell it well. And I'm going to follow these rules. And if I'm doing that, now I'm really following the rules of screenwriting. But then you get to this question, do I have to follow all the rules? Well, no, you don't have to follow all the rules. Depending on the story you're telling, maybe you format it a little different. As long as it's clear, people are going to be able to track with that. But you still have to show that you can play within the world. You still have to show you can play within the framework. You still have to show that you are a student of the craft of storytelling in this medium. As long as you're doing that, you're generally okay. Now, there's some things you can not do. Well, yeah, but if you're not doing things and leaving tires off the car, that's bad. If you're misformatting things or over formatting things, that's bad. So you kind of have to follow the rules. And when people say you got to follow the rules, that's what they're talking about. They're talking about how you play within the realm of screenwriting and showing that you are a good community member of the screenwriting community and you can contribute excellent stories in this medium, and that will help you get on your way. Hopefully this has been helpful to you. If it has, please like, subscribe, bell, all that. I really, really do appreciate it. Don't forget about links below. And when you choose to tell a story that matters. See you later.